Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the show. A warning, dear listener, that you may find this podcast disturbing as it deals with issues of domestic violence. There is also some swearing in this podcast. Today I'm here with Jane. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jane. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie.
Can you tell me your cultural background?
I am Chinese I'm Chinese generally, but I was born in the US, and I guess being British educated, most of my friends were English. So there was some sort of cultural kind of conflict with home. And my parents were quite westernized, but still, it's very different to school and home. So I remember in my teenage years, actually, having an extraordinarily early curfew compared to my friends on Friday nights. And I was the firstborn, so I took all the hits, whereas my sisters, we always joke how they get it off quite easily.
I'm firstborn too. We had to pave the way, didn't we? So the younger ones can just breeze through.
Exactly. Exactly. So I always felt like I had to justify it, going out with friends, because all my friends were going out till midnight and I didn't understand why I had to be at home at 9, all that stuff. There was some conflict there, but generally happy. And then I went off to university.
So what were you doing with your life before you met your partner?
My partner now is amazing. We've been together for 7 years. But prior to that, so in my teens and early 20s, I always called myself a serial dater, where I would go through one boyfriend after another boyfriend. It was almost like I was scared to be alone. And so I would almost trade off people to kind of fill in that gap. And I guess I thought about it. And so before I met my current partner, I was finally single for 2 years. But if we were talking about kind of my early dating years, it started off actually, I would say 12 years ago. And I was in a relationship with one person for 2 years. And then traded immediately to another violent relationship.
So you had 2 violent relationships, one after the other.
Correct. When I saw your post, I wanted to share was because I felt that as an early educated middle upper class female, it was surprising to me now that upon reflection how little confidence I had. And I think there's many women who experience that. So my first abusive relationship was right after university. And I had first moved back to Hong Kong. I still actually had another boyfriend in Canada, but then had met someone in Hong Kong and was bedazzled by the finance industry. Guys who were spoiling you, they were paying for your drinks. And as a 21, 22-year-old, you're like, my goodness, this is so glamorous, so glamorous. And, having grown up in Hong Kong, I had all my high school friends, and we used to go out Friday, Saturday nights, and that was very normal. And so when I met him, I kind of bumped into him a few times at the clubs, and he was older. I think he was about 6, 7 years older. So it was very cool to be with them, and things moved very quickly initially. And he had an apartment in Sheung that he was roommating with another guy. And they were friends with club owners in Hong Kong back in the day. And so I could go into the clubs and I could bring in my friends to the clubs, and that was all very flashy. So actually, I moved in with him almost unofficially very quickly. And then because things started moving in so quickly, he was so sweet. It was almost like I'd never seen that kind of dedication.
So he was really attentive and really
Yeah.
gave you lots of things and showered you with gifts.
Like, say we went out on a Friday night, he would get quite drunk and he would cry on my shoulders, and he would show a softer side. And I really felt I was so important in his life. And then he would he would tell me stories where he tried to, vandalize. I mean, that is no way cool in any way. In my life currently, like, you don't vandalize. But back in the day, I was like, my goodness, you're so, kind of conflicted, and I just
risk taker.
Yeah, and I wanted to save him. I really wanted to save him. And then he started criticizing my friends. So I found that I was actually spending more and more time with him and his friends. And then whenever I invited him to gather with my friends, he would not engage. So he'd be on his BlackBerry the whole time. He'd be on his phone the whole time, to the point where it was never embarrassing for me because I was almost always protecting him, but to the point where it made it so I was just not having fun with him being around, so that I would then excuse myself.
So did you find that you started to isolate yourself from your friends a bit?
Yeah. I would stop seeing them. And so he was the first Asian boyfriend I had. And my friends were predominantly British at the time from school. And he would give me arbitrary reasons like, I don't like white people, they bullied me in school, and, it really pains me to hang out with them. And so he was 27 and I was 21, and I was like, my goodness. And he was like, your friends are bad influences on you, and he, at the time to me, was on a successful career path. So he's like, if you really want a successful career, you need to kind of rid of these people. It was a slow brainwashing kind of movement.
And did you feel like it was starting to control your behaviour and your choices?
Yes. To the point where my mom rarely saw me, and she would be like, you're such a strong-willed person, because our teenage years, there was a lot of fighting, and with him, you're completely docile. Like, she's like, what is going on?
So your mum sensed something wasn't right early on, did she?
Yeah.
And did you brush that off, or did you take it on board?
I just didn't really want to hear it. But similarly, like when there was Chinese family gatherings, he would join and not participate again, or he would feign illness and he'd hide in one of the guest rooms, and not just show up, and then want to leave. So my parents were obviously not impressed with that.
How did you feel about that at the time?
It didn't make me feel very good. I couldn't pinpoint my finger in terms of exactly what, because he made me think that I was relying on him. So come like the third month or the fourth month, he was already like, well, I'm already supporting your life, Jane. I'm taking you out to all these restaurants, and I'm paying for them, and, and you're staying with me a lot, and that's water bills. And it all started to come out, and he's like, I'm paying for your taxis. So then I almost felt indebted to him. And so it was a lot of pressure.
And that gave him more power, didn't it?
Yeah.
And were you working at the time?
I was.
Oh, okay.
I was working, and it almost gave him more power because I was constantly looking to him for career advice. So, if something happened to work or something, I would ask him, oh, can you look at this work, or just briefly kind of edit or check my CV if it's okay. And he would obviously put it in last priority, and I would have to ask really nicely. And then he would kind of finally at the end be like, all right, fine, and then he would then start correcting how I would talk to him. So if we got into a fight, he's like, well, why do you have the ability to piss me off? Why do you have to fuck with me? And I was so confused. I felt like I was constantly tiptoeing on eggshells. So I think it started with verbal and emotional abuse very early on. And I actually cannot remember the first time he shoved me or pushed me, but it almost was very frequent. I remember we were on holiday to Thailand, and we were just getting off the airport, and I was walking a bit too slowly, kind of getting my bags, and he would just push me in front of everybody and be like, can you just walk a bit faster? And I think that was maybe 8-9 months into the relationship. But at that point, I think I was so deflated, and I had no real friends, that I was upset, but then I couldn't really express it anymore. And at some point in the 2 years, he had a very, very big fight with my parents. So I think I cannot remember exactly. I must have blocked it out from my memory, but I remember maybe 1 year in, Asian mothers are always so so strong and vivacious and kind of, well, not vicious, but, forthright. And so sometimes I would kind of moan about my mum to him, and he's like, well, your mother is just, and then he would go on and on. So after kind of cutting out all my friends, he started kind of working on my parents. And it almost became like he took on this role of being my defender. And so it was Jane against the world, and he was defending everyone against me. It really screwed with your head. I think he showed up one time at my parents' house, and he started telling off my mum, like yelling and screaming at her, being like, you can't treat Jane this way. She doesn't belong to you. She's her own person. And then my mum started crying, and she was shouting at him, and it was all actually really painful, and I was in tears. And then he kind of took me off and kind of went away in a taxi, and I was just in tears.
That must have been so stressful. It would have been terrible.
My mother was devastated. I was devastated. But then I didn't even know whose side to be on. I was so lost. I was really, really lost.
Well, I think that's a little part of domestic violence is you lose your self-esteem, you lose your independence, you lose the will to be able to protect yourself and others, and it's very easy to get caught up in what's going on and not know which way to turn or what choices to make. Is that how you felt?
Absolutely. So I'd lost all my school friends, like as in they wouldn't even call me up or anything. But then in the meantime, I met some new friends. That was like a year and a bit into it. And, we started going out, and he didn't really like that. But he was traveling so much at this time. He was always traveling across Asia for his work.
Oh, so how was it when he was away?
I wouldn't hear about it. Like he would joke that he had different area codes, and but in the beginning I really missed him. But then when I started meeting these new friends, I think coming up to the 2-year mark, I was actually a little bit over it because I'd met some new friends. And I think I'd met these new friends, and we'd been out, and I'd gotten him quite drunk, as young, early 22, 23-year-olds do. And he picked me up at the lobby, and this I remember very clearly, and he got so pissed off with me, he grabbed my hair and smashed my head on the glass table of the lobby, and the guards saw as well. And then I was in tears, and I was quite drunk. And then he took me upstairs to the flat, and then I think I just kind of passed out. And then the next day he emailed me, he's like, let me take you out for lunch. I think we went to the Conrad. It was one of them very nice. Like, I think it was the Nicolini's lunch, and he took me out for lunch. And it was so lovely. And he was like, oh, I can't control myself. This is why I love you, because you can understand me.
So quite manipulative.
And I forgave him. And it happened multiple times. So he had this thing that was really funny. So when he would used to travel, he'd be like, hey, because I was, and as a 22, 23-year-old, you get asked out on dates still and stuff. And he was like, look, if guys ask you out on dates, just go out on dates with them. I don't care. As long as you don't kiss them or anything, just get a free meal out of them. And
that's interesting.
Yeah. So I was like, all right, then.
Did you do that?
Yeah, I did, because it come to the point where he was also a workaholic. So he was very into me leading up to it. But then when I found that I was alone at the apartment a lot, coming up to the 6 months onwards, I was always on my own. And so I started telling him, oh, so-and-so maybe asked me on a date. He's like, go for it. Just go and have dinner with this person, that person. And then one time I had dinner with someone that was supposed to help my career, and I told him about it. And we had a bit too much to drink, and I got home. And so again, he had grabbed my hair, and he smashed me in the bathtub, my head in the bathtub, and I had bruises. And the next day, he took me out to another nice lunch. I think it was one of the Marriott pool bars for lunch again. And it was almost, but he never hurt me he would put some frozen peas on my head afterwards. And he'd be super tender, and he's like, look, I don't want to hurt you. You really, crossed the line there. And I found that, his opinions mattered the most at that time. If I wore something, it was to make him happy. If I had a haircut, it was to kind of make him to compliment me. And so I gave him all my power.
And it's interesting, it seems that there were patterns of behaviour They're telling you to go and be free, then fighting with you, and then taking you to lunch and caring for you afterwards. Have you heard of the term gaslighting?
No.
So gaslighting is where people tell lies and they don't tell you things straight to your face, or they deny they've said something even though you have proof, or they use what's near and dear to you as ammunition. They wear you down over time. Their actions don't match their words. They throw in positive reinforcement to confuse you. They know confusion weakens people. They try to align people against you. They tell you or others that you are crazy. They tell you everyone else is a liar. Do you feel like that was part of his behaviour?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
Interesting.
And I actually think he had gotten me to a point where my confidence was so deflated. But he continued. I mean, there were moments of like really nice things that he'd do. But the really nice things he would do was he would buy a bottle of champagne when we went out, like clubbing or something. And I would be so proud because I was 22 and I'm like, he still buys a bottle of champagne for me and my friends. Really, near the end of it, because I'd met my new friends and we'd gone out together a few times, and it seems that they were having a lot of fun and they were really enjoying their 20s. They were a really fun group of people that did not necessarily know or cared about him, that I almost kind of found myself gravitating towards that. I had then met my second boyfriend, who then pursued me.
Is that how you left this first relationship?
Yes.
Okay. Which fits in with your comment that you were a serial dater.
Yes.
That you kind of went from one person to the next to the next. So you didn't leave this first one until the second one came along.
Exactly.
Which is interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, so go on. Tell me about this second one. He pursued you.
Yeah, so we had met through work, and I'd already started to have a bit more fun at this point. I had moved out with a roommate, so we were sharing a flat in Shenyang. And I really then felt maybe kind of on the surface I'd recovered. And I was, kind of embracing my 23-year-old or 24-year-old self. And so this new boyfriend had pursued me, and he was 8 years older. He was 32, and he was athletic, and I liked sports. And, it seemed on the surface we had a lot in common, and he loved life. Like on our first date, he took me wakeboarding, and it was like a double date. So I took a girlfriend with me, and we went wakeboarding, and then we went to the stoop. And it was like he was showing me a different side of Hong Kong. And, he was also quite tall, and he was like totally different to my last boyfriend. And he just seemed like a barrel of laughs and just so much fun.
So how did you extricate yourself from that first relationship?
That's a very good question, because I broke up with my first, I'm just calling them first and second because they're not actually my first and second.
Sure.
But
they're the two we're talking about in this context that were violent towards you.
Yes. So he had come back from a business trip. And I was almost quite giddy because I'd been on a first date with this guy already over the weekend. And I was like, okay, well, I've got something sorted now. I can leave you. I was like, we're breaking up. I've had it. And he was like, oh, wow, I really didn't expect you to. He was like, I had never thought you would be the one to break up with me. And he, on the surface, took it very well. But the following 4 months, he was sleeping outside my door. Yes.
Oh, so he was stalking you, basically.
He was stalking me. He would text my new boyfriend. He would text me nonstop. He would get drunk and then call me, and he would cry.
Did you feel afraid during this time? Or was it just frustrating and annoying?
I was so confused. With my second boyfriend, here he was, again, showering me with so many amazing things. And he had fun friends. The funny thing with the second one was, because I think there were parts of it that resembled the first one, in the sense that the second one got drunk very early on in the relationship and then started calling me cunt on text. And then being like very aggressive, like fuck you cunt kind of. And so I called my mom and I was like, Mom, that's not cool, right? Like that's not. But I had to call my mum because I didn't know anymore what was okay and what was not okay.
Yeah, that's interesting that you weren't sure whether it was acceptable or not, when now I'm sure you can look back 10 years later and realise it's completely unacceptable.
Absolutely.
Isn't that interesting? So it just shows how desensitised you can get when you're in those situations.
Yeah.
And how when your self-esteem is damaged and when you're young and vulnerable, that these things can really mess with your head.
Yeah. So mum's like, he sounds like a drunken guilo to me, being the Asian mother that she is. She's like, ditch him immediately. And I was
Good
like,
advice, Mama.
And then, of course, I didn't take it.
Of course you didn't.
Because he was so charming, generally, when, he was so sweet in those early days when he would get off work at 6, so he was unbroken. He'd be like, hey, just checking on you. How are you? Did you have a nice day? And because I'd lacked so much of that emotional attention from my first boyfriend near the end, that I was like, this is such a welcome response or attention. So we'd gotten together maybe in the fall, and then he was already planning, we did very quickly a Bangkok weekend trip getaway, and he splashed money. And so, kind of very wowing me at the time. And then early Christmas, he booked an entire trip to Australia, took me to Noosa, it was money.
So was he lavishing more on you than the first boyfriend did?
Yes.
Right, so it had gotten bigger and better from that perspective.
Yes. If I was still in the same, which I was still in the same kind of hamster wheel.
Yes. It's interesting that you jumped out of the frying pan into the fire, as they say.
Yes.
So early on, did you feel with this second boyfriend that he was pushing the boundaries? Apart from the text, was there anything else that went on that sort of were red flags for you?
He would get drunk a lot and just kind of verbally abuse, but not really as manipulative. He would throw kind of profanities and he thought it was funny. And then even he wouldn't apologize the next day. He'd be like, but I thought that was funny. And so I was like, okay, sure. Anyway. And the red flags didn't show up so early, but because he was very social. So he would have fun with my new friends, and we kind of all had barbecues together. We'd have Thanksgiving together.
He must have seemed a little bit more appealing than the first one because he was socialising with your friends and family.
Yes. And actually, after a while, my parents really liked him, but not because they knew him, but just because he was actually in the room and kind of having a chat about kind of his work or whatever.
And what were your instincts telling you about the relationship at this point?
I really liked him at this point. And actually, another red flag was he was very early on pushing for sex. And I wasn't exactly ready, but then I did it anyway. And then he kept talking about it very early on. And then also my first boyfriend had started calling me a lot when we were together, when I was with the second boyfriend. And then he started calling me a liar, my second boyfriend, he said. And he started, in a few months' time, he started developing a complex. He thought I was constantly cheating on him. I don't know kind of where it started to come from, but then it became a really big stressor. I mean, now that we're talking about red flags, it's more and more. So he actually loves partying at the time. So he would literally, I couldn't even keep up with him. So I remembered kind of passing out early, didn't bother wanting to go to Clock and Flap, and he kind of drove my friends, and him and my friends went to Clock and Flap, and he got really pissed off with me, and he was like, you're cheating on me, that's why you didn't come. And so it almost got to the point where I was constantly apologizing or justifying. Or one time I got off work and I was in my work clothes and I was with him and his friends, and he loved drinking. He loved it. It was really fun in the beginning, but then it was really a lot of pressure. I would get off work I meet him after my work, and he got off work earlier, or he'd be with the clients. So I was in my work clothes, and then I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go home first to change, and then I'll come back out. And he's like, no, you're going home, and you're probably going to cheat on me. You're going to go back to your ex-boyfriend, and you're probably going to have sex with him. And then he would start with the aggressive language, and he'd start calling me names. And it was a completely different type of battle, actually, but very similar in the sense that I felt like I was so helpless because nothing I said would make a difference. And all I wanted was for him to believe me. It was so frustrating.
I can imagine it would have been so frustrating and really, really difficult to get him to understand that he was wrong and that his assumptions weren't correct. And to get that harmony back would be so difficult. How did you cope with that kind of pressure? Like, how did you deal with it day in and day out? Or
Well, I think I talked all my new friends' ears off again. They got to a point where they were very frustrated with me because I wasn't taking any of their advice as well. So they started distancing themselves from me. We were still all going out together, and that was fine.
And when did this relationship with the second one turn violent?
So I think, I'm trying to remember, we broke up one time, and I actually cannot remember the reason why we broke up the first time. But I'd broken up with him because something had happened, and my friends had said, don't go back to him. Like, do not go back to him. I think it was something he'd done. I actually just blocked it out of my memory. I actually don't remember the first time why. But I remember I actually had broken up with him, and I was like, I'm done with you. You are just completely crazy as well, and I don't want to deal with this. But it was really hard as well because I didn't have someone lined up.
Which was your pattern, wasn't it?
Yes. And so my friends were like, okay, let's go out, we'll go on junks, and you have to stop thinking about this person. He's toxic, whatever. We can have fun anyway without him. But then I started missing him, and I was only kind of thinking of the good side. And then I thought, maybe, it was my fault because I was picking up my first boyfriend's calls, and I was kind of still. So what happened one time was, this was very early on, because I'd lived at my first boyfriend's apartment, basically. One time I'd gotten drunk and I mistakenly went home back to his apartment thinking that I'd gone home. And so my first boyfriend then called my second boyfriend and was like, oh, well, you clearly can't even keep track of your girlfriend. And so that was a very big problem. And but that was very early on. I think that was a very big reason. Well, I don't know if it was a very big reason or it was a couple of reasons, but that was second boyfriend's exacerbation of the whole cheating thing.
Yes, that could have been the catalyst for that paranoia that set in with him, couldn't it?
Yeah. It lasted, I think the breakup lasted for 2 weeks or something, because the second boyfriend started knocking on my door every morning. I think he would drop off flowers. And then I think we ended up getting back together very quickly again.
You're listening to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford, and we're talking to Jane. She's going to tell us about the time that she found her boyfriend cheating on her and the consequences of that discovery.
Oh, I remember now. He cheated on me.
Oh, did he?
Yes. So I thought the two events were merged together, but actually there were two separate events. Okay. So basically what happened was, one time I was out with him and his friends, and I had gotten tired. Our favorite thing to do at the time, our habit was, wake up early Saturday, go to Pure, do a workout together, and then have a wine lunch or boozy brunch at Wagyu. It was 10 years ago. That was kind of what we loved doing.
I think there's a lot of people that still love doing that.
And so it was a Friday night, and I was like, look, actually, I'm really quite tired, and I'd just rather go home. I was out with them maybe till 11 or 12. He got pissed off with me and then decided to send a ton of messages and texts to kind of call me a liar, call me a cunt, call me a cheater, all those things again. And I was like, okay, fine, whatever. I was so desensitized, like you said. I was just kind of letting it wash through. So the next morning I'd woken up early. I'd been to a place, well, my work at the time, I had to wake up at 6 anyway to be at the desk very early. So I was like, okay, well, I'm up at 6:30. I'll probably go over to his place and surprise him and maybe, kind of be like, good morning, kind of so nice to see you kind of thing. So I got a taxi up to his place, and I remember the guard downstairs was kind of like, don't go in. He just moved to a new place, and I kind of helped him with the move as well. So the guard was like, who are you? You don't. And I'm like, but you saw me a few times. So then I kind of ignored him, and then I went up. It was quite funny because it was a flat he bought, and he'd done it all up, and it was all these cool gadgets he'd put in. The door code was dated my birthday, all these little sweet things. So then I pressed in, and I could hear him snoring. And then I went in, and I was about to kind of slip into the bed with him just for a snuggle. And then there was someone in bed with him. there was, like, I saw a patch of black hair.
What was your reaction?
I think I was in shock. I was definitely in shock. And I think I was just so shocked that I tapped her on the shoulder. He was completely passed out. He had obviously had a very 4 a.m. kind of late night, and God knows what else happened. So I kind of tapped her on the shoulder and I was like, excuse me, I'm his girlfriend. And the girl kind of was like half sleepy and she was like, oh. And I was like, did you sleep together last night? She's like, and then she kind of just, I think she was a local person and was kind of caught. And I could kind of just stood there and watched her get dressed and leave. I was flabbergasted. I could not find words. And then it came, and then it hit me. And I started screaming at him, and I whacked him on his arm. And I mean, I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just so furious. I shook him, and he was like, what? And I was like, you cheated on me. You cheated on me. How could you? I remember this very clearly. Like, he started laughing as like a deflection. He was like, you're joking. What? Like, no, there's no one here. You can see. But as in, he was still probably drunk or high off drugs or whatever it was that he was doing. I was in tears. I was so upset, and I'd packed my clothes and I'd left. And that was when I broke up with him the first time. Yeah.
And it's so interesting that he was always accusing you of cheating, yet he cheated.
And so that was why my friends had then was like, do not get back with him. But it was funny because then I felt lonely. Like, the first few days I was like, I felt like I was so self-righteous. But then he started calling me and started apologizing. And I felt like I was repeating a lot. Like, I was like, but you have no idea how I felt. You have no idea. I walked into the situation to the point, like, I felt like he was just kind of apologizing, but like also a bit like it was washing over him, as in he'd heard it, or like it wasn't even, he didn't feel it. Like, the emotion, the empathy wasn't there. But then I still took him back anyway. That was a mistake. Things were seemingly okay, and we were like going out a few bits, and then we cut down on the alcohol, and we cut down slightly on the partying. What really did it was not long after, actually. It was a month or so after we'd gone back together. And literally, at this point, my friends were kind of over it. Like, they were like, okay, well, you do whatever you want, but we're just not really going to care about it. And so actually, near the end, I was again quite isolated with him. What had happened was the final event was that we had a full day of drinking, and then we had gone to a friend's birthday party, which was a civilized dinner, but we'd gone in completely hammered. He was, probably high on substance. And then we went out clubbing after, and then went home. And the next day was Sunday, and we were meant to have a seafood lunch with my family. We'd woken up, and I think maybe some of my guy friends had texted me, and then he had grabbed my phone in the morning, and then it started. It's very funny. So when I was telling the police this, so it was a full morning, like 6, 7 a.m., and I didn't leave his apartment until maybe noon. So I was there for a good few hours. It was like the Inquisition. Like, he was like, so why did you do this? So it kind of escalated. He had then poured himself like a couple of whiskeys in the morning, like, because I guess he was angry. And I remembered I was terrified. Actually, it must be later, because Mom and Dad then called me around noon and were like, are you still coming to lunch? And I remembered picking up the phone, but running, because he was running after me in the apartment. Like, so my mom was like, what's going on? And I was like, Mom, I can't talk to you right now. Like, we're not coming to lunch. And like, so as in he was kind of chasing me around the apartment.
Oh, your mum must have felt so worried.
Poor mom.
Poor mum.
Poor mom. I love her so much these days. She's a great grandma. So then they called me back a few times, and I was like, look, can't talk. And then I just had missed calls from them. And then I think he then did more coke or something. And then he started shoving me around. But then I think I'd gotten to the point where like I was trying to prove to him that I was not a liar and I was not a cheater. That I remember very, very clearly. Like, he was kind of sitting on the couch, like, and then I was kind of kneeling next to him, being like, look, nothing, there was nothing, we don't have to be upset here. he would calm down and it would escalate again, calm down. And every time he calmed down, I thought, oh, great, like I've rescued the situation. We can move on from here. And then it would escalate again.
And at any point, did you feel like you should leave?
So what happened was at one point, he then grabbed my bra and my clothing and then he pushed me down and I fell down. I'm not a big person. And then he grabbed my bra and he started pounding me on the ground, like on the ground multiple times. And that's when I started heaving and I was like, I need to leave. And that was much later in the afternoon. So then I called my friend and she was with her boyfriend and I was in shock, I think, again. They were in Happy Valley and I kind of met them in Happy Valley for a coffee. And I remember this in shock and she told me this because we were passing by a restaurant and I was like, oh, amazing. They're doing like some sort of restaurant deal. And she was like, you have bruises everywhere. And so they insisted on me going to the hospital. And apparently they tested my heart rate and it was something crazy like 180 or something like that. And then she insisted that I call the police.
Your friend or someone at the hospital?
My friend.
Okay, so you were at the hospital when you called the police, did you?
Yeah.
And what happened then?
So then I gave a statement and then the following months ensued. So actually, funnily enough, I couldn't move. I was in so much pain. My mom had to come to my flat to nurse me.
So you were quite badly injured.
I was really badly injured. Like the next day I couldn't move. Mom had to like make me soup and stuff, and I had to take the day off work because it was a Monday. Mom was in my bedroom in my small flat when he was knocking on the door the next day with flowers and photos of our memories. My mom was like, do not open that door.
Would you have opened the door if your mom was
I couldn't even
there?
open the door. I couldn't even get out of the bed.
If you could have got out of the bed, would you have opened the door, do you think?
I don't know.
Anyway, so Mum was there protecting you and sent him away.
Yeah.
What happened with the police report? Did he get charged?
So we then ended up hiring lawyers. It was a good few months. And actually that was a very good thing because he would come and try to apologize in that week until he got served. He had a notice and then he knew not to contact me anymore. And I think that was a very strong sign. And it was a very different time. So I didn't actually party at all during that time. I was meeting with the lawyers at night to try and get my statements correct. Because apparently in court, if you don't get exactly the same line, they'll drill you over and over again. And it's actually not nice to be a victim in court. And so I was kind of quite worried. And it turned out that he had then hired another lawyer in the same firm to kind of combat me. It was a very interesting time where I kind of had to piece together those nights. And the lawyer was saying, you'll be asked why were you in there for so many hours. And I think that's part of the reason why I want to share my stories. Just now we talked about so many incidences where I could have just got up and left. I mean, there's a lot of people in Hong Kong. You can easily date another person. But I think for me at the time, and I don't know if this kind of resonates with anyone, it was just the minute they calm down, you think you can save them. You can save the situation and everything will be okay. It's that completely warped mindset you come to think and believe. So that was actually obviously something that I had to explain. But obviously rather than saying that, I had to explain in detail, line by line, kind of what had escalated and then when it calmed down, etc. However, come the day of the court hearing, I had all my friends there. They were really supportive, actually. They showed up. They took the morning off, and they were really nice about it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was really... And he was just alone with his lawyer. My mom was there. It was really, really nice.
Nice to have support.
But then what was sad for me was that before we went in, the judge said, basically, the lawyers had gone together, and they had said to the judge, look, if you want to drop with the case, this is your last chance, I mean, I remember sitting in the room and the judge was like, many times, people have fights in relationships and sometimes we get a bit vengeant, and, we really don't have to take it to court.
The judge was saying this?
Yes, and she's a woman. I really felt like, oh, well, I practiced so much, but then I started feeling doubt, what if I'm completely crucified on that stand? I didn't want to be crucified anymore, and so then I dropped it. And so I remember this very clearly. My friends then left and my mother went in and was like, you need to apologize to my daughter and you need to apologize to her friends for all the stress you caused. And he kind of did like a half apology, like smirk on the face. And then we walked past a restaurant by the courts and he was having a beer with the lawyers to celebrate. And I remember going back home because I'd taken the day off from work and I just felt a bit deflated. And I was like, oh, well, karma didn't really come out this way, huh?
It does sound like you were pressured to drop it.
I did feel like it was. And then my friends were like, oh, actually, well, do you really want to go through with this? And I guess they were also kind of...
They were trying to protect you, weren't they? In case it became very emotionally difficult, I suppose.
Yeah. So what he had gotten was a slap on the wrist for 1 year, as in he could not be called into the police within that year.
So he was kind of put on probation for a year.
Exactly.
And do you look back now and regret that you dropped it? Do you wish you'd carried it forward, or do you think that was the right thing at the time for you?
So karma happened another way. So he worked at a bank and actually they were going through redundancy and he actually got made redundant in the same week. And actually I felt a little bit isolated. So I had to kind of pick up the pieces after that.
Did you have any therapy?
Mom took me to a few traumatic therapy sessions. There were a few sessions where I kind of had to deal with personal boundaries and that was actually very emotional. I remembered like just tears kind of falling through my face. It was so shocking how emotional it was for me. But then also another therapy I'd done was basically I met an amazing new group of women who were doing the vagina monologues. And they really saved me during that time. Like we were just kind of on the play together. We shared our stories.
So you were in the vagina monologue.
Yeah, and actually then all the pieces started to come together. So one of the girls in the vagina monologues she was a burlesque teacher in London, and she was like, ladies, let's just do a little burlesque show. We could do a little choreography. And so I found myself hanging out with girls I would normally never hang out with from all over. Friday nights we would then kind of do choreographies for burlesque, and we did like photo shoots, and it was really fun. And it was like a group of women that we just kind of hung out together. And then one thing led to another. A friend of mine at the time had really pushed me to, so I'd made a vow to be single after that. I think it was
for the first time?
For the first time.
Good for you.
Well, for the first time since I was like 15 or something. Mm-hmm. And I think that was such a life event that I was like, I cannot continue this way and have it work. Like, I can't repeat this. So I think I did a few things at the time, like I quit smoking and then I started picking up running again. So I did my first marathon. A friend of mine who I was briefly dating, he'd done a lot of the ultra marathons and he's like, look, you've got these amazing women that you're hanging out with. Why don't you? And one of them was basically, she was on the charity for one of the charities in Hong Kong that kind of help refugee women. He was like, why don't you just, you have a story and why don't you do an ultra marathon? So I did an ultra marathon to raise money for these women. And at the time I didn't say it was my story again, but it was one step at a time to kind of build my confidence.
And it is empowering and it is a really positive thing to give back to others, isn't it? And to try and make a difference. And that's good for your self-esteem.
Yeah. And I didn't really have time to kind of think about, worry about my ex's life or how he was getting on because I was so busy with packing for my marathons or kind of going to rehearsals. And
so I think there's a real lesson here for women in a similar situation. If they're coming out of a situation like you were in, to get involved with community projects, get involved with things, surround yourself with positive people, help and give back to others. There's things that you can do that are really good for your well-being. And it sounds like you just naturally did that.
Well, Mum actually, she was like, why don't you just do volunteer work? It's literally free therapy. So
it is.
Yeah. So then Saturday mornings I started going to an elderly home and kind of hung out with them. And I loved hearing their stories, things I would never have done. And actually I started looking forward to it and it was really nice. So actually at that time I had a very low key kind of social life and just kind of kept to myself. I would go on dates and stuff, but like I was doing it more for the fun of it. And more for a conversation than anything else.
It sounds like you were really in a process of personal growth and recovery and that you needed to take the time to do that for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was also kind of just being comfortable hanging out alone
And how was that, getting used to being on your own for the first time ever?
Well, I loved it. To the point where my husband, he would joke, he's like, you and your me time. Although now with a child, you never have a me time.
Not until they're 18.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's almost like I really started having a really fun time. And on the back of that, actually, I had been single and kind of having fun. And I'd met my second boyfriend's new girlfriend, and she'd just broken up with him. And he was physically abusive with her. The reason why I kept a low social profile at the time was there were some rumors about me that people didn't believe me, and they thought that I was just out all the time. I was the party girl, and therefore I was spreading lies about him. But then when it was her as well, then people started paying attention. And so I remember she'd reached out to me, and she was like, can we just have a chat? And I was like, I really don't want to. Like, there's no point to kind of go back. I'm actually in a really good place now. And it's only been, I think it was just a year.
So you didn't meet with her?
I did, actually.
Oh, you did?
And then we ended up having like a 5-hour chat. And she told me all the things he'd done. He pushed her into the lift, and then he'd apologize. And I told her, actually, I had a 1-year probation on him. And she's like, I wish I knew. Then I would have called the police. And actually, I was like, look, karma happens in funny ways. Who knows?
And how was that, meeting her? Were you able to offer her support? Was it cathartic? Was it traumatic? What was it like?
Initially, when I would hear things that he had found other people and stuff, I thought I was unlovable. I was like, oh, but I'm doing all this stuff for me now. How is that someone like him could find new girlfriends? And I thought it was me. But then seeing her kind of, and understanding her story behind it now, it was very cathartic for both of us, I think. It was like, oh, it's not us, it was him. So,
and I think it's a sad fact of life that many women aren't believed in this situation.
Yeah.
It's a shame, and I think it can make it harder for people to come forward, can't it, and to seek help or get support because they're afraid they won't be believed.
Yeah.
And also their self-esteem is low because of the way they've been treated, so it takes a lot of courage. And to be dismissed can be devastating.
Yeah, and also I think, the cultural connotations of a woman kind of saying, oh, but he did this and this and this. It's always, people are like, oh, but she's just moaning, versus, if a guy said something, they'd be like, oh, wow, really? So women almost don't want to complain too much. Or I think there are things in society that can be changed to help people.
I think so, and I think talking about these kind of issues like this in this podcast, it raises awareness, it gives people hope, it makes people understand that they can come out the other side, and there are ways that they can get help and support. And at the end of this podcast, I will mention some. But I think there is more of a voice coming for women, particularly with domestic violence. And I'm hoping that there will be a change for the younger generation and that they won't have to go through what a lot of us have been through. And I've actually been through it myself as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've had 2 domestic violent relationships in my 20s. So that was over 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So I do understand what you're going through, and it's also, dear to my heart that you're willing to talk about it, because it is something that can happen to anybody. Strong, independent, creative, intelligent women, it can happen to anyone.
And actually, it's so funny you mentioned this now, because I've spoken to a few of my very good girlfriends in the past, and, after a few glasses of wine, they actually do share. And the amount of stories I have heard from people I know, women I know, it's a stigma. There's been, I can, from the top of my mind right now, I can count 3 people I know that have been through that.
I know a lot as well. I know a lot. And, unfortunately, I'm from Australia, and unfortunately in Australia there's a lot of women being killed through domestic violence, and there's many people that are suffering, and we need to raise awareness, and I think we need to get the message out there to women that there is help available, and that you don't have to put up with it, and that you can get desensitized and feel like you are responsible, or that there's no way out, or it's your fault, or this won't change, or maybe you can change them, or you can save them. There's many different ways of thinking. It's all individual.
Yeah.
But we can hope by people listening to this podcast, if they're in a situation where they're being mistreated, they might be able to reach out to a friend, or reach out to their doctor, or to the church, or to their family, or to local counselling services and get the help and support that they need, because it's out there.
Yeah, definitely. And oftentimes, it's just a matter of even someone nudging you.
And you know who nudged me? My mum.
Yeah.
My mum as well said, you don't have to put up with this and we'll help you move out. And we can offer, your uncle will let you move into his house.
Yeah.
And it's just like, once I had permission, I was young as well. I was only, 24.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right out of uni, right?
Yeah. And I'd had a baby at 23 and she was only 10 months old when I left. And to have my parents give me permission to go at that age was great. It really empowered me and gave me that strength to go. So I think there's also a message there for family members. If you see something going on, speak up and offer support and encourage somebody to take back their power and to make a change and to get themselves into a safe situation, whatever that may be.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I don't know whether I would have left if I didn't have my mum saying, you don't have to put up with this and this isn't right. And she hadn't even seen the worst of it. She'd only seen a little bit.
Yeah. But also, even though the victim might not hear you the first time, I think, at some point, something clicks. I think everybody has a bottom line, hopefully, before it gets too much. So even just repetition.
That's a good point. Don't give up on that person. If you see somebody in a difficult situation or you notice the bruising or you can see a change in somebody, keep the dialogue going, keep the conversation going so that you can maybe offer them help and support.
Yeah.
If you could turn back time before you met your partner and you could speak to yourself, what would you say to yourself, to your younger self, before you met those two guys and got into that situation of domestic violence?
Look for the right things in someone, because I think those 2 years of me being single, I came to realize what I was really after. And so someone with a sense of humor, someone who's kind, someone who's generally happy and quite simple.
That's so true. And originally, correct me if I'm wrong, you were looking for the glamorous lifestyle and the money and the glitz and the nightlife and being spoiled.
Yeah.
And that actually, it turns out, wasn't what's most important to you in a relationship. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're 21, I was like, yes, I want to go out clubbing and I want to be the first one in and I want to travel around the world. And
you feel more grown up with this older man looking after you and, getting about.
Oh, totally.
My ex-husband was 9 years older than me.
Yeah.
So same thing again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was, dazzled by, this life experience that he had and this sort of mature, approach. And it just was, I was completely fooled.
Absolutely. Because they're not necessarily more mature or more emotionally available.
No, in fact, they're less mature and completely emotionally unavailable.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting because I don't know if it's when you're young or just when you're disempowered that you ignore the signs and you make excuses and you hope that somebody will change. And I think from my point of view, it's not something I would ever put up with now that I'm in my 50s because I know that life doesn't have to be like that. But I think at 21, I was kind of like, well, is this normal? Or, do all people behave like this? Even though my parents, I was completely modelled a great loving relationship with absolutely no violence. So then why would I think it was acceptable?
Yeah.
What was your parents' relationship like?
Well, Mum was always feisty, but they'd get into a fight and then they'd make up. Was
it physical though?
With Asian parents, the funny thing was Mum actually apologized to me when I was going through those relationships because growing up I was beaten as a child when I did something wrong or I had a very sharp tongue, and so that's quite kind of predominant. You'll see it in a lot of Chinese families.
Okay.
And so I was beaten as a child. Generally, it was almost less questioned because it was like, I remembered when I was at the convent, it was a local school. We would kind of talk about it. Oh, but did you get beaten up with this stick or the cleaning one? But then it was only when I was in the British school that I got angry at my parents for doing it. Because
you realised that it wasn't happening in other cultures.
Yes.
Or some cultures.
Yeah.
So when you're in therapy, did you make any link between how you were treated as a child and then what happened to you as an adult?
Yeah, so when Mum took me to the traumatic therapy sessions, she actually was very sad and she apologized. You know, they were actually much more relaxed with my sisters, and my sisters really breezed past life with them. And they were older as well. We're quite a big age gap difference. And so, she did mention, maybe I've made some mistakes.
How did that feel to you to have your mum apologise?
It made us feel I felt so much closer. It almost mended the relationship.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
Probably really meaningful and very timely.
Because also she never apologizes. So it was very meaningful.
That's really nice. I'm so pleased that happened. And that's why I think it's also another message for our listeners is it's important to get into therapy and get that support after these sort of issues, isn't it?
Yes.
It's not something that you should just deal with on your own.
Oh, no. Because sometimes the tools are there, but you don't even see it. And therapy, I think it's becoming more socially accepted.
Totally.
I love that there's so many kind of variants of therapy out there that kind of people can help and heal themselves.
That's right. You can find the type of therapy that's right for you.
Yeah.
And if money's an object, there are places that will do stuff pro bono. There are places where it's means tested, like St. John's in Hong Kong. So if you're on a low wage, they will charge you very little. There are community groups that you can reach out to. So, like the Samaritans and Kelly Support and things like that. So I think that's a really good message for us to get across to our listeners. I don't want people to feel that they can't access the help if they don't have the money.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's still there. So what was one thing you would like people to know about intimate partner violence?
There's a saying in Chinese, which my mum would kind of say to me when I was little, if I stole her snacks or something. And she'd be like, you can guard the day, you can guard the night, but you can never guard the thieves at home.
Can you say it in Chinese?
Yeah, fong, yeah, fong, ga cat lan fong.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you explain what that might mean?
I feel like that everyone, my friends who I've talked to, it's always the ones you trust that abuse. They can very easily abuse it because you start giving them more and more power. I think intimacy is a very sacred thing, and I think that when you are in a very intimate relationship, it can also never judge a book by its cover, both from the person outside as well as the two people in the relationship.
And do you think we dive in too deep too quickly when we're young? Many people?
Yes. I mean, with my amazing husband now, we're the same age and we goof around together, but I think we're friends first, and there's a very deep respect for that. And I think when you're younger, you kind of just want to have your life's problems all solved immediately. And the thing is, they're never solved. There'll be new problems and, there'll be new issues. And the idea is to kind of journey through them with someone else versus to find someone who can solve them for you.
Wow, that's really profound. And that's something to really think about because you're so right.
Yeah.
And what advice would you give to somebody who's listening who thinks, actually, I'm not being treated as well as I should be, or perhaps I'm in a domestic violence situation I need to get out of? What advice would you give to that listener?
If they're having that question, they actually should leave. There's even that doubt, they need to leave. And I know this is so difficult for so many of them. So I think the reason I say they need to leave is because sometimes you don't have the luxury to wait it out. You just don't know, because basically the other person could be a ticking time bomb. You just don't know.
Absolutely, and you could be really at risk.
But I think if you're kind of in the beginning of the relationship and there's some sort of verbal, emotional, not abuse immediately, but some kind of thing that doesn't really set right, where it's maybe just some kind of manipulation, then that's a red flag.
And I think listen to those red flags and listen to your intuition. That's what I didn't do when I was young, and I was in 2 5-year domestic violent relationships.
Yeah.
And I saw the red flags early and I chose to ignore them.
Yes.
I just chose to ignore them. I didn't want to see them.
Yes, exactly.
And I always thought that was a one-off, or it's because he was drinking, or it's because I did this or I did that. But it did escalate and it got worse and worse until I was really in danger. And, one time I had this guy throwing stuff at me while I was in bed, and I had to tell my 3-year-old daughter to get in a cupboard, and she had to get into a cupboard to protect herself while he was chucking bowls of cereal at me that was smashing into the wall.
Yeah.
And I was in a situation, I'm a big woman, I'm 6 foot tall, and I'm strong. But I knew that there was this element of psychoticness behind his eyes, that even if I tried to physically fight him or stand up for myself, I was in massive danger. Even though I could perhaps have matched his strength because I'm so big and strong, I absolutely went subservient and passive and did everything I could to diffuse the situation because I felt intuitively how much danger I was in.
That is so interesting. That's actually exactly it. Because every single time there was an episode, it was a psychotic behavior, and there was a psychotic look about it that you became so subservient because you just wanted to diffuse the situation, exactly like you said.
Yeah. And you can feel the energy that it's off, can't you? And you can feel that they're a hair trigger away from possibly killing you.
Yeah.
Or possibly really, really injuring you or your child or my child.
Yeah.
So, it's really, really interesting to see how we behave in those situations, and it wouldn't be how I would have predicted that I would have behaved, especially being so strong.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I remember being chased by this guy. I used to work in a nightclub, and I was chased by this short guy to my car after I worked. I was 19 or 20 years old, and I ran like mad. I had my car keys in my hand. I always carried them in my hand for safety. And if I had to punch somebody, I'd give them an extra injury. And I ran like mad, and I got to the car door, and I opened the car door, and I got in the car, and I locked the door, and he jumped on the front of the car. And he was swearing at me, "You bitch." And I turned on the car keys, and I drove into him slowly. I didn't hurt him, but I drove into him and got away. And it's amazing how I was able to react. I was strong, I was fast, I was powerful, and I got myself out of that situation that could have been completely different. But in my personal relationship situation, completely different behaviour.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And you know what? I've never put that together until now in this conversation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've never made that connection before. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. Because in any other situation, if someone bumps into me sometimes, I'm like, hey, ouch. But back then I was feisty as well. I took it after my mom. And so it's so interesting that mom had noticed early on that it was not me to be so subservient.
She picked that up, and so did my mum. So mums out there, keep an eye on your daughters because you know your child, you know your daughter.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on her, and if things are shifting and changing, ask questions.
Definitely.
So amazing. Tell me, what was your purpose for volunteering to talk on this podcast about domestic violence?
I wanted to share my story because I want to remove the stigma of survivors. I guess my mom was from an older generation, but even from all the other people that had known me in my earlier years, that I felt that I was, quote unquote, the party girl, that, I couldn't share my story because it was too much hassle, and then people kept telling me to move on. I wanted to share that actually, yes, I have moved on, but I'm also okay to share my story because the reason why I'm okay to share it is because I have moved on. I was able to kind of get help from everyone that I knew and, build a community around it. And it's not shameful to be a survivor. My mom would tell me, oh, don't tell your new boyfriend that you were in domestic relationships. It's terrible. But you know what my husband said to me when I told him the story? It was one of their sweetest moments. He said to me, that doesn't change how I feel about you. And I think it was very early on. And
it's so affirming.
Yes.
And it's probably strengthened your connection and your love for him.
Yeah, it was so nice that he said that. I think people with domestic violence, there is another life out there. There's another life out there for them. And, and oftentimes I find that they're these very educated, like you said, educated, intelligent women who have very high standards to themselves. So anything that doesn't look picture perfect, they don't even want to be included into, their kind of profile. And, life's not perfect, and people have past and histories. the only way we can kind of get over it is to talk about it. Then it becomes a thing. And then actually, you know what? It becomes shameful for the abuser.
Exactly. And we're raising awareness so that other people in this situation will understand that there is another life out there that they can enjoy, full of love and laughter and joy and happiness, and that they don't have to tolerate being mistreated, whether it's physical or verbal or sexual abuse, and that there are ways in the community and within families that they can get help and support, and that they're not alone.
Absolutely.
Well, Jane, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's really been an amazing pleasure, and your story is just so inspirational, and it's so wonderful to be able to, I think, for both of us to share what we've been through, and hope that if we make a difference to one person out there listening, then that's absolutely fantastic, and that's why I'm doing these podcasts.
Thank you, Julie. You're doing an amazing thing.
If you're in Hong Kong and you need any sort of support for domestic violence, please call the Samaritans on 2896 0000. If you're in another country, please call your local hotline or look for counselling services in your local area. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.